Dragonlance creator Margaret Weis was, quote, astonished that Wizards of the Coast did not wokeify the characters in the new Dungeons and Dragons Players Handbook, specifically the Dragonlance characters. Before we get to this, I'd like to ask you, please hit that subscribe button, hit that bell for notifications so you don't miss any of our future videos here at the Trent Report. I wrote this up over at thatparkplace.com. A huge fan of Dragonlance, read all of the original works and even kind of the sequels they did with Mina and all that stuff. Love this stuff growing up in middle school and high school. This was the stuff that I loved to read. But this is what happened here. We have this user here, Kevin Lamb. He wrote this. And he says, color me shocked that Dragonlance characters somehow squeaked by unscathed in the new Players Handbook artwork. 3 physically fit white heterosexual heroes looking badass against a genuine threat. Someone at Wizards of the Coast is definitely getting fired for letting that slip through. And then Margaret Weis reacted, I am astonished. Obviously, you can see here in the artwork, you have Caramon over here, Raceland right here, and then their sister Kidiara right here fighting a dragon. I'm not sure if this is something that would have actually taken place in any of the Dragonlance novels, given the fact that it looks like this is post Raceland basically becoming a god. The Twins trilogy, which I think is the best. Those are the best books in the Dragonlance series. If you haven't read them, highly recommend them. Those I enjoyed those. But she says, I'm astonished. She would go on and respond to this user here, Joe Stacy, challenging her. And he asked, do you really want to endorse an anti-diversity and inclusivity message? And Margaret Weis says, I wasn't endorsing anything. Just glad to see Raceland and Caramon. And then she also issued another response to the same post. And she says, I think he was being ironic. I went through Kevin Lamb's post. He was definitely not being he was definitely not being ironic. He's definitely opposed to woke ideology being pushed into Dungeons and Dragons, and he was actually shocked that these Dragonlance characters were not wokeified, because if you've seen any of the online discussion about what is in these players handbooks and all the art, it's absolutely has indeed been wokeified, and it's being lampooned for cartoonish diversity inspired characters and promotion of homosexual activity. We have this one here, Thor Odinson. He wrote, holy crap, Wizards of the Dungeons and Dragons has gone out of its way to make D&D lame. And they shared a side-by-side of what orcs used to look like in Dungeons and Dragons and what they look like now. A lot of people obviously comparing them to Mexicans. Here's one of these users doing that, Drunken Armadillo Press. He wrote, I guess this is more of the player handbook art, including the Mexican orcs. Remember when D&D book art showed badass battles and monsters and not a bunch of gay crap? And speaking specifically of the gay nonsense, Clownfish TV host Neon pointed this out. There are 2 dwarves baking goods, I guess, in some kind of tavern, and they have tattoos of each other's beards on their arms. Obviously, I think the implication here that these 2 are engaged in disordered homosexual activities with each other. It's absolutely disgusting. It is degenerate. And at the end of the day, it is evil. And one should not give money to people that hate you. These people creating this stuff absolutely hate humanity. They definitely indeed do. They might think that they don't, but their actions show that they do, given the fact that they are advocating for activities that do not allow for procreation. They reject the gift of life. And they reject how we are created as man and woman and how we complement each other. Another user here kind of highlighted the orcs, Casimir Urbanski. He wrote this, if some random OSR publisher made a book with this illustration, the entire gaming left would be going nuts, calling them racist. That was the whole thing back in the day. I remember covering this just a couple of years ago. You had all of these wokeists claiming that orcs were somehow a stand-in for black people and they were racist. Well, now you literally have Wizards of the Coast, Dungeons and Dragons seemingly creating Mexican orcs here. Like Pancho Villa type characters. I mean, to me, it's almost like a they're almost like a combination of Mexicans and Huns, and maybe even a little bit of like Vietnamese or something like that. Because you've got this guy here. He reminds me of the Hun from Mulan. This guy over here reminds me of like a Vietnamese rice farmer. So that's kind of where what I'm seeing. Obviously, there's a lot of like falconry happening here with with these new orcs. Now, I didn't know orcs were known for their falconry. Maybe people are thinking maybe there's like some Pancho Villa vibes or something like this. But that is definitely people are opposed to this crap. They're clearly cultural stereotypes being imposed on these orcs now, when that was something that a lot of wokeists were complaining about, something that didn't actually exist, and now it actually does. There's like no complaints from these people, and it's the ones who are actually pushing this stuff are the ones were previously complaining about it, right? You literally can't make it up. Mark Kern also reacted to this. He says Hasbro and D&D LARPers felt that orcs were racist because all they could see were black people. Again, yeah, he's exactly pointing out what I was just talking about. Guess they fixed that by actually making them racially coded this time. Exactly. Kind of beat me to the punch there. And so we do know that this stuff is definitely in Wizards of the Coast now. It is part of the company's like corporate values, quote unquote values. It's not really values because there's nothing really of value that they're actually pushing here. It's actually all anti-values. It's all immoral stuff here. It's clearly woke ideology. It should be opposed. It's evil and it's wrong. But this is what these executives in this company have been saying. Jason Tondro said this back in February. He says, there are materials in original Dungeons & Dragons that would never pass our inclusivity reviews today. Some of it you can understand, like, okay, these are a bunch of war gamers and they're using armies from history. So when they create a warrior class for D&D, they call it the Fighting Man because that's what they were used to. They were all men. They were all white dudes from Lake Geneva and the Twin Cities. So obviously taking issue with the fact that the people creating the original Dungeons & Dragons were white. And then obviously pointing out that they described the character as a man because that is what men do. They're the ones who fight. And they got to change that now because they want women to be fighting as well. Evil stuff here. He then added this, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot of material in this book, and I won't go over all of it, but it would not pass our inclusivity reviews today. So again, doubling down on this whole inclusivity stuff. As we've talked about, inclusivity is literally just anti-white, just same as diversity. It's clearly used to try and remove white characters and decrease the number of them that exist. He goes on and says, well, we wouldn't change it. It's history. What we can do is acknowledge it and show how far we've come because that's not D&D anymore. D&D gets more diverse and has a larger audience every day. The more diverse the game becomes, the more people of different genders and ethnic backgrounds and faiths see themselves in the game. Then they go make their own versions of the game, and more players start to see themselves represented in the game. The more diverse the creators get, the more diverse the players become, and that's the way it should be. We've seen this argument from Victoria Alonso with the Marvel Cinematic Universe. She was pushing this everywhere she possibly could at the Annecy Film Festival, promoting what was it? The What If animated show that is on Disney Plus. And what have we seen lately? Flop after flop after flop. Reduction in people watching their movies, people tuning out of their shows on Disney Plus. This is not a winning strategy. You can see this in other industries. It does not work. It is a failure. It loses money. You might get a short-term bump, but at the end of the day, in the long run, it is a giant loser. Just look at Star Wars. Look at the Marvel Cinematic Universe. What was the last film we saw from Marvel? It was The Marvels. It didn't even cross the $200 million mark in the global box office. The last show we saw from Marvel was Echo. It literally didn't even have as many watched minutes as Loki, the first episode of Loki, and they dropped I don't even know how many, 6 episodes or whatever it was of Echo at the same time. So all 6 episodes didn't even make up for the first season of Loki, which was like 2019 when they had way less subscribers on Disney Plus as well. Clearly, this stuff does not work. People are uninterested in it. This guy is lying. He's trying to gaslight people, and he's probably trying to gaslight himself, honestly, into believing that this is actually something that's good for the business when it clearly is not. Nevertheless, he goes on and says, so this book is very interesting. So I think it really highlights how far the audience has come and how the game has changed over the 50 years, how it's played, who plays it, and how it's created. In many ways, the way that it's created is the part that changed the least, because a huge driver in early D&D was fan creations, and that's still true today. And And I find it very interesting and very exciting to see how the game has grown, how the audience has grown, how we as creators and designers have learned from the past, both what to do and what not to do. I think this book has a lot to teach us, but it's also just fun to see. They're clearly just erasing the past with everything they're doing now. He admits this. He admits that this stuff wouldn't even be able to pass their inclusivity reviews. It just wouldn't work. It just shows you what this studio, what this company is doing and how evil they truly are and how racist they are. And it's not just one executive. We had this Wizards of the Coast executive producer, Kyle Brink. He appeared on the Three Black Halflings YouTube channel and actually encouraged white males to leave tabletop gaming in general, not just Dungeons and Dragons. He says, he points to himself and he's like, this is not the face of the hobby anymore. I'm not the majority of this hobby anymore. And it's so important to me that my team of creators look like my players and have the lived experience that my players do. And I think there's been mistakes made in years past where people assume that D&D players were all, white dudes in a basement, which has been a faulty assumption for a lot of years and gets more and more false every day. He then said this. And so in my viewpoint, honestly, guys like me can't leave soon enough for this hobby. And we owe you good games. We owe you good products. And so we need to make sure that everyone working on it is real good at it. And that means not just hiring, but developing. So it literally sounds like he is instituting race-based hiring policies at Wizards of the Coast. It sounds very illegal. Sounds like there should be an EEOC complaint filed against Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro. Sounds like they are violating federal law, just as many of these other major companies are doing so. And we'll see if this comes to bite them. We do know that America First Legal has filed an EEOC complaint against the Walt Disney Company, obviously priming for a potential lawsuit against the company for employment discrimination based on race. So he goes on and says, when we bring people in who are good, we need to empower them, give them more room to run, give them guidance on what we learned when we created stuff so they can create great stuff too. Remember, he's talking about non-white people because he says white people need to leave the industry, can't leave soon enough for this hobby. So he's literally wants white people out of the hobby. And this is a executive producer at Wizards of the Coast expressing this racist idea, this racist thought. It's absolutely disgusting. It is truly, truly evil. Nevertheless, he goes on and says, and then I always hire people smarter than me so I can get out of their way. That's my approach. As long as we stay on this trajectory, the face of D&D will literally change. So he's obviously pointing to himself. He's saying that the face will literally change. Obviously, again, I think that is another confirmation that they do indeed have race-based hiring policies because he's saying that they aren't going to be hiring white people. So this is an absolutely disgusting, evil company. And it is kind of surprising that they didn't change the Dragonlance characters. Margaret Weis obviously saying she was astonished. And there might be a reason for that. I wrote this up over at Bounty and Comics when I was their editor-in-chief. This was back in 2020. Wow, they got a lot of pop-ups. Back in 2020 here. And they actually settled a lawsuit with Wizards of the Coast after it was revealed that Wizards of the Coast was trying to basically strong-arm them into pushing a bunch of diversity stuff here. So that might be why the Dragonlance characters were not changed, because there was clearly a settlement that Margaret Weis and Tracy Hickman made with Wizards of the Coast. You can see here, Margaret Weis kind of confirmed that back in December 2020. And where does she let me get down here. She says she retweeted this here saying the Dragonlance Nexus post on X saying the Dragonlance lawsuit has been settled, folks. This is definitely good news and probably leads to the name drop of 5e Draconians by Joe Manganiello earlier this week. So again, this settlement might be the reason why we didn't see those Dragonlance characters getting wokeified. But obviously, she did say that she was astonished, so maybe not. But that could be one of the reasons why Wizards of the Coast decided not to do that when they did it for pretty much everything else. But let me know what you guys make of this. Let me know in the comments below. Remember to always be charitable, especially to each other, but to always speak the truth.